Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to XJW Diaries, where we can talk about life as a Jehovah's Witness and as an ex-Jehovah's Witness. My name is Justin, and this is diary entry number 4, RJW's A Cult, Part 1. When I was still a Jehovah's Witness, and I would go out in service and go door to door on a Saturday morning, the vast majority of doors that I went to, nobody would answer. And in the cases where they did answer, it would usually be a simple no thank you, or in some cases, they would take the magazine. It was pretty rare that I would get somebody who was rude. So when it did happen, it always kind of stuck with me. In one case in particular, I knock on a door, a guy answers, and before I could even get my presentation out, he looks right at me, points his finger at me, and says, "You are in a cult, and you had better get out before it's too late." And then he slammed the door. And for some reason, that always kind of stuck with me, especially as I was going through my years of waking up. And one of the reasons it stuck with me is because that word cult just felt so extreme. I mean, witnesses are not going out into the middle of the forest in all black cloaks and sacrificing animals. So in this video, we're going to talk about if the Jehovah's Witnesses really are a cult. And as the title would suggest, this will be a two-part video. So in this first part, we're going to look at things from a professional point of view, the view of Dr. Stephen Hassan. And we're going to use his BITE model to see if the witnesses fit into that definition of a cult. So let's get into it. Now, before we go into the BITE model, let me just clarify who Stephen Hassan is for those who don't know. He is a PhD, a licensed psychologist, a teacher, and mental health counselor specializing in cults, and he's also an author, so pretty busy guy. One of his well-known books is Combating Cult Mind Control, and that book has helped so many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to understand what they went through and to learn how to recover. And if that's not enough, he is also a cult survivor himself. So when it comes to getting a professional opinion on cults, this guy has both studied it and lived through it. So now that you know who he is, what is this BITE model? So the BITE model is a series of lists containing various methods that cults and high control groups use to recruit and maintain control. It was developed by Stephen Hassan along with the help of several top researchers who have studied brainwashing and cognitive dissonance theory. Now, it's not necessary for a cult to meet every single item on these lists, but examining any organization using this list will determine if mind control is being used to promote dependency and obedience. And by mind control, I'm not talking about something mystical or weird. From the BITE model website, they define it as a specific set of methods and techniques that influence how a person thinks, feels, and acts. Now, BITE stands for B, behavior control, I, information control, T, thought control, and E, emotional control. And each of these 4 categories has various methods that cults use to maintain control and power. Now again, an organization doesn't need to meet every single item on these lists. And there are certainly things on these lists that you will not find in the Jehovah's Witnesses, thank goodness. And for that matter, you probably won't find them in most modern-day cults. But there are certainly things on these lists that you definitely will find within the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to go through the BITE model list, and in each category, I'll just pick 3 areas where the witnesses perfectly fit into the BITE model. And I've also added a link in the description to the website where you can view the BITE model for yourself. So I definitely encourage you to do that. It's pretty interesting. So first, let's start with the 3 areas where the witnesses fit the BITE model when it comes to behavior control. The first area is controlling clothing and hairstyle. Now, most religions, especially Christian-based religions, will have some rules when it comes to modesty, but the witnesses take things up a notch. Within the Kingdom Hall, all men are expected to wear a suit and tie, and all women are expected to wear dresses. But the clothing control extends outside of the Kingdom Hall as well. Not too long ago, a talk was given by governing body member Tony Morris. And in this talk, he made it very, very clear that Jehovah's Witness men are not to wear skinny jeans or any tight-fitting clothing. In his view, this clothing, quote-unquote, promotes homosexuality. Very progressive view there. The witnesses are also forbidden from wearing any brands or styles that would make them seem like they were, quote-unquote, part of the world. So this means that if your favorite music artist creates a clothing line, and if that music artist is frowned upon in the witness community, you would not be allowed to wear that clothing. And when it comes to Jehovah's Witness women, they have an even tougher time when it comes to clothing. I can remember in the years just before I woke up, there was a huge, huge push to forbid Jehovah's Witness women from wearing yoga pants. They felt it was too tight, too sexualized. Going beyond that, Jehovah's Witness women are repeatedly reminded that if their tops are too low or if their bottoms are too high, that they would be personally responsible if their clothing caused one of the witness men to feel, quote-unquote, spiritually stumbled. And when it comes to hairstyles, men are not allowed to grow their hair out or style their hair in any way that would be considered too urban or worldly, and women are not allowed to dye their hair or style their hair in a way that would draw too much attention. Breaking these rules can result in disciplinary actions. So when I was a witness, and especially when I was serving as a ministerial servant, I pretty much always had to keep my hair in a very short, simple style. If I were a witness today, I would probably not be allowed to have my hair the way it is now. In most congregations, they would consider this to be too worldly, too urban, and I certainly would not be able to give parts from the stage. So this is why if you spend enough time around the witnesses, you'll start to notice this sense of sameness when it comes to the way that they style and groom themselves. So now let's move on to the second behavior control method, which is major time spent with group indoctrination and self-indoctrination. Being a Jehovah's Witness is not just a Sunday thing. In a typical week, witnesses are expected to do the following. Read the daily text every morning or evening, which consists of a scripture or a set of scriptures, along with a few paragraphs from the organization, providing insight on those scriptures. They must study the Bible reading for that week and prepare answers. They must study the book study chapters for that week and prepare answers for that as well. If they have any parts during the midweek meeting, they must also prepare for those parts and practice them. Then they are to begin their weekend by meeting with their service group and going out in the ministry for at least a few hours. And going out in the ministry, of course, requires some prep. And if you're leading out for service, you must also prepare a short presentation to encourage and motivate your service group before they go out in the ministry. Then you have to study the Watchtower lesson for each week and prepare answers for that. When it comes to meetings, they are expected to attend the Sunday meeting, midweek meeting, and hold a family study night once a week. They are expected to read the magazines and stay up to date on any JW broadcast videos that are released. And when it comes to JW broadcast, there are short videos released sporadically, and then there is a longer monthly broadcast that witnesses are expected to watch and keep up to date on. Then you have your assemblies, which are either 2-day or 1-day events twice a year, and they typically run from 9 a.m. to about 4 p.m. And of course you have the conventions, which come once a year, and they run for 3 days. And each of those days, similar to assembly, runs from early morning to early evening. All day thing for 3 days. So as you can see, witnesses have a full schedule. Being a Jehovah's Witness is not just a Sunday thing. It's an entire lifestyle. And everything I mentioned, that's just for your average witness. Now, if you are a pioneer, or a ministerial servant, or an elder, your list just got bigger. So I think the point is clear. Witnesses spend a considerable amount of time in either group indoctrination through meetings, or self-indoctrination through studying. In a typical week, on any given day, your average witness is either at a meeting or studying for the next meeting. It's pretty rare that you have a day just to yourself. Now, the third behavior control method is separation of families. Newly recruited Jehovah's Witnesses are told to distance themselves from family members who are not witnesses. And witnesses who leave the organization by getting disfellowshipped or disassociated, they are shunned by their Jehovah's Witness family members. If these family members break the shunning rule and keep regular contact with a former Jehovah's Witness, they risk getting disciplinary action. Now, just to give you a clear picture of the reality of the shunning rule, you have ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have had a parent that has died, and they have no idea about it until months later. You have fathers who do not attend their daughter's wedding, and you have grandparents who have never met their grandchildren. So now let's move on to information control, the I in BITE. And this is an area where witnesses really fit the BITE model. I mean, so much that it almost felt like the BITE model was made for the witnesses. So let's check that out. So the first method of information control that I like to talk about is minimizing or discouraging access to non-cult sources of information. And the BITE model goes on to list specifics, such as internet, TV, radio, books, etc., critical information, former members, and keeping members so busy that they don't have time to think and investigate. In the Jehovah's Witness organization, we see all of this stuff. When it comes to religious information, Jehovah's Witnesses are only allowed to get quote-unquote spiritual food from the organization. So in other words, witnesses consider themselves to be Christians, right? Well, a witness would not be allowed to go to a Christian bookstore and buy a study Bible or a book or a magazine that offers a different view or interpretation of the Bible. If they did and another witness saw it, they would be asked to get rid of it or face disciplinary action. When it comes to critical information, Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed not to watch, listen to, or read anything that speaks critical of the organization. This is why the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses don't know that there's a child sex abuse issue within the organization. When these things come out in the news or get printed in magazines or newspapers, witnesses are told to turn the other way, since they would be viewing content that is critical of the religion. And of course, we already know witnesses are absolutely forbidden from getting any information from former members. Jehovah's Witnesses consider former members to be apostates, and all information from apostates, they are told, are lies to deceive you. And as we already talked about in the behavior control section, the organization definitely keeps their witnesses incredibly busy. So the second informational control method is encouraging members to spy on each other. When me and my family first joined the witnesses, one of the first things I learned was that I had to be very careful of what I said around other witnesses. As I brought up in a previous video, I think it was diary entry number 1, there are a lot of questions, just everyday questions, that became loaded questions once we got into the witness community. Questions like, what's your favorite movie? Or what's your favorite music artist? You really have to think before you answer a question like that. And it gets even more loaded when you're asked about a witness belief. So as a witness, you don't have the freedom to say that one of the doctrines don't make sense, or that you disagree with something. That will get you turned in. You also have to be careful with your personal devices as well. In my own experience, when I was in the process of waking up and really deciding whether or not to leave the religion, I spent countless hours doing just tons of research, watching videos much like this one, to really get a whole picture of what I was involved in. And you better bet I had to make sure that I was doing all of that research in a private tab. Or at the very least, I needed to remember to clear my history. Because if I didn't, and I let a fellow witness see my phone or my tablet, and they did some snooping, which, believe me, they definitely do, they would turn me into the elders, and I would find myself in a judicial committee on grounds of apostasy faster than Taco Bell can send you to the restroom. Now, moving on, the third informational control method that I want to bring out is extensive use of cult-generated information. And again, the witnesses fall right into this. As I mentioned before, Jehovah's Witnesses are only allowed to get what they call quote-unquote spiritual food from the organization. And the organization gives them plenty. You have the Watchtower magazine. You have the Awake magazine. You have the JW broadcast videos. The Caleb and Sophia videos for kids. The Jehovah's Witness translation of the Bible. New daily textbooks every year. several book releases at every convention, and the list goes on. The list of books, magazines, videos, and music produced by the Jehovah's Witnesses is beyond humongous. They keep their members buried in their own content. So now let's talk about thought control. And this is where things can definitely get deeper from a psychological perspective. And this can cause some deep programming, which can take a lot of time and effort to undo. So the first thought control method is requiring the members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth. That sounds an awful lot like the witnesses, right? And that word truth says enough right there, doesn't it? As I said in my last video, witnesses are told that they have the truth, and that all other religions are misguided lies. They are so confident that they have the truth that witnesses use that word truth as a way to refer to their doctrine and the organization itself. So Jehovah's Witnesses will ask each other, when did you come to the truth? As a way of asking, when did you join the organization? So we're all one and the same. And as I brought out before, calling it the truth for so many years definitely has an impact on you subconsciously, to the point where you have pretty much programmed or even hypnotized yourself in a way to think of only the witnesses as having the truth, since you now associate that word truth with the organization. And there's no wiggle room here either. As a witness, you cannot believe that any other organization also teaches the truth. It's only the witnesses. The second control method is encouraging only good and proper thoughts. That police culture that exists in the witnesses, it's not just about witnesses policing each other. They also train you to police yourself. Through books, magazines, and videos, witnesses are trained how to do absolutely amazing mental gymnastics in order to stop themselves from thinking any thoughts that would be unapproved by the organization. This covers a lot of things, but it specifically targets any thoughts that may be critical of the organization. The self-policing goes so deep that your average Jehovah's Witness cannot even comprehend the idea of the Jehovah's Witnesses not having the truth or having major legal issues or lying to their members. And that leads us right into the third thought control method, which is forbidding critical questions about leadership, doctrine, or policy. So this is how things work. If you question the leadership, they will say the Jehovah's Witnesses are a perfect organization ran by imperfect men. God will sort everything out in due time. If you question the doctrine, they will say you need to study more and pray more. An elder may even send you a list of articles to look up on the JW library as a way to rebuild your faith. If you question the policy, they will say you are running ahead of Jehovah's chariot, or you need to humble yourself before the chosen men. Now, if you do not accept these answers, and especially if you share these critical questions with the other witnesses, you will quickly be disfellowshipped on grounds of apostasy. There is no room to question leadership, doctrine, or policy. It's about acceptance, not about understanding. So now let's move on to our last category, emotional control. We know humans are emotional creatures, so emotional control can be very powerful. Let's see how the witnesses use that. So the first emotional control method from the BITE model that witnesses use is promoting feelings of guilt or unworthiness. In my experience, the 15 years that I was involved with the witnesses, I constantly was made to feel guilty and unworthy. In fact, when I left the organization, letting go of guilt and unworthiness was one of the first things I needed to do in order to rebuild my self-esteem. As a witness, you are constantly reminded that you are a sinner. You are constantly reminded that the majority of movies, music, games, and books are bad. And if you enjoy any of them, you should feel bad about that. When it comes to feeling unworthy, there is always this message that you're never doing enough. Give less time to your hobbies so you can go out in service for an extra hour. At conventions, they will bring up people on stage as examples. This man here sold his business, moved into a smaller house, and started pioneering full-time. Be more like him. What are you doing? This young woman got straight A's all through high school and was offered a full college scholarship, but she refused so that she could devote her time to the ministry and to help out Bethel, which is the Jehovah's Witness headquarters. Be more like her. This person here learned a whole new language just to help out in a foreign language service group. Be more like that. Do more hours in service. Give more expressive answers at meetings. Volunteer to take on more duties. Use your vacation time to assist with the Jehovah's Witness construction projects. The list goes on. As a Jehovah's Witness, you are never doing enough. And they will constantly put people in front of you as an example of how they want you to be. So you're constantly comparing yourselves to others. You're constantly doing actions to seek external approval. That does absolute wonders for your mental and emotional health. Now, the second emotional control method is a definite key one to Jehovah's Witness leadership, and that's instilling fear. I'm going to make a whole video just about fear. It plays a big part in the religion. As a Jehovah's Witness, you are taught to be fearful of the outside world, since the whole world is headed for destruction and you don't want to be destroyed along with it. You are taught to fear any independent thinking or having critical views of the organization, since that can cause you to leave the truth and therefore not make it into paradise. You are taught that if you leave the organization, you will be shunned. Break a rule, you are shunned. You are also fearful that you are not worthy in God's eyes, and therefore, no matter how good of a witness you are, maybe you weren't good enough to make it into paradise. Now, my personal biggest fear growing up as a witness, when I was around 12 to 13 years old, was the teaching that at Armageddon, the government will turn on the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that I may be taken to a concentration camp where I will need to remain faithful even till death. That's why to this day, when I see documentaries about the Holocaust, it'll still stir my stomach because I had those fears that I would go through that myself. The final emotional control method that I like to talk about is phobia indoctrination, inculcating irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning the leader's authority. The bite model list goes on to specify some of these phobias, which include there being no happiness or fulfillment possible outside the group, terrible consequences if you leave, shunning of those who leave, and teaching that there is never a legitimate reason to leave, and that those who leave are weak or unspiritual. In the Jehovah's Witnesses, we see all of these things. Witnesses are told that those who leave are leaving the protection of Jehovah's organization, and therefore they can never be truly happy. They are told horror stories of people who leave and who get addicted to drugs or gambling. They are told that if you leave the organization, you are leaving God, and you cannot have a relationship with God except through the Jehovah's Witnesses. Obviously, the shunning arrangement is also a constant fear. If you do the wrong thing or question the organization, you can get disfellowshipped, which means being cut off from your family. The organization are the owners of your family and your friends. You are just a renter, and renters can be evicted. And of course, Jehovah's Witnesses hold the view that those who leave the organization were just too spiritually weak, or they got stumbled, or they weren't humble enough, or the most hurtful one, which is that Jehovah is pushing out the people who are unworthy. So from a witness perspective, if you leave the organization, that means that there is something wrong with you. It never crosses their mind that maybe, just maybe, all these people are leaving because there is something wrong with the organization. So as you can see, that word cult doesn't always just mean people in dark cloaks with secret handshakes. With the bite model, we have clear traits that come from the research of several psychology professionals that really show us what a modern day cult actually is. And the witnesses, they meet a lot of these traits. When I was going through the beginning phases of my waking up process, I ran into the bite model. It was the first time that I was really forced to see, in plain English, the amount of control that the organization had over my life and my mindset. And it was at that moment that I remembered back to that guy who told me, "You are in a cult." Back when I was a witness and I left that guy's door, I just kind of laughed it off. And I did my usual mental gymnastics to try to discredit his words and push them out of my head as fast as possible. But when I saw the bite model, it was as if I could see my old self through his eyes, and it all made sense. So that's it for part one. Now we've seen things from a professional point of view, and in part two, we'll look at things from a more personal point of view. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you've learned something. I thank you for your time. I truly appreciate your time. That's why I try to keep these videos somewhat short. Please hit the like button if you liked it. Please hit the subscribe button if you loved it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.